Good evening, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us. I am still allowing some people in. Thank you. Hi, I see Velma. Hi. Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. So my name is Claudia Zini, and I'm the director of Kuma International. This is the second appointment within the Artists in Conversation program that will bring together 4 artists and photographers from Bosnia and Herzegovina who now live in diaspora. So we had the pleasure to talk to Velma Babic on Tuesday. Tonight we are here with Ana Vorovic. Welcome, Ana. Next week we will have 2 more appointments. We will have an artist talk next Tuesday with Selma Chatvic-Hughes in Sharjah, and then on Thursday next week Velibor Božović in Montreal will join us. So I'm really happy to be here with Ana today. So it's the first time that Ana joined us at Kuma. So it's really a pleasure. And I have to say that Ana and I never really had the pleasure to meet in person because the way the way I found Ana was because I received an email last year from a gallery in London because Ana was having her first major solo show exhibition in the UK. So I received an invitation from this gallery in London. Unfortunately, I wasn't in London, so I couldn't attend the exhibition. But then I went, I was reading the invitation, the press release. I read the name Ana Vorovic, and I thought Ana must be, she must have some connection to former Yugoslavia, most probably. And then I saw that, I saw in her biography that she was from Sarajevo, and then something told me that it was probably a good idea to get in touch with her and talk more about her work and what she was doing in London. So we had many Skype calls, and we chatted a lot, and finally we agreed that Ana would take part to the Artists in Conversation program. So I'm really glad that you're here with us, Ana. I will just leave you the floor. And yeah, thank you so much again for accepting Kuma invitation.
Thank you very much, Claudia, for your introduction. And it's a real pleasure to be here. I suppose when we met online, it was about a year ago. So a year later, here we are. And yeah, I'm really pleased to be able to have this platform. It's something that was actually very unexpected for me. Obviously, I was, working on my practice over the years and not really knowing that, we would get to this stage where there would be this platform in Sarajevo, and there would be Kuma International, and that one day we would all kind of have this platform to meet each other and, show our practice in the context of this. So it's really unique and still sort of quite surreal in a way for me, but also very poignant that it's happening 25 years, since the war, and also in a way matching my kind of development as well, and perhaps others' development, others who are in diaspora, where that sort of awakening of the past happened very, very gradually. So as I worked in my practice, I've been an artist for a while, and those urges began very early on, and they did begin during the Civil War when I was in London. And so over time, I think, the themes and ideas slowly rose to the surface, but it wasn't necessarily clear at the beginning what was happening. And so it was almost like this consciousness kind of awakening, the layers peeling off until this point where now there is this platform and where we're talking about it together. I think it simply takes time, something like this, from something so, traumatic and disruptive as a war. So I guess I can give a little background of my childhood and how I ended up in the UK before I start to present my work. And by the way, if anyone wants to ask a question, and Claudia will too, during my talk, please feel free to do that, because this will be quite informal. I don't have anything prepared, a script prepared or anything, so I'm just gonna free flow, you know, freestyle as I look through the images of my work. So I was born in 1981, as you might have seen in the video, and I lived in former Yugoslavia until I was 8. I was born in Sarajevo. My family are all from there. They were all there during the war, apart from a couple of members. But when I was a child, when I was a baby, we moved to a really small town called Grude in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And my mum got a job there. And so my mum worked as a teacher. My dad actually ran a club and he was a DJ there. And we became, in a way, quite a known family there. It's a very small town. But at the same time, eventually there was some negative kind of attention that was being brought to us. And that's to do with the kind of ethnic background of my dad. And we're all sort of mixed, you know, Serb, Croat. And so there was some issues with a bit of persecution towards my dad because of that. The tension was building already. This was before the war. And for a few reasons, one of them was just economic reasons, you know, financial reasons. The other reasons were my parents sort of wanting to live in London, wanting to see how life would be there, to improve on things, you know, to improve on sort of, a lot of it was financial, a lot of it was a real struggle to make ends meet. So my dad moved to London a couple of years before us in 1987, and he saved up, worked, saved money and sent us money back. And then we eventually joined him in 1989. Me and my mum joined him. It's hard to think about all this. I'm not good with history, but I'm trying to do this just as a kind of backdrop. So we joined my dad in London in 1989. However, I had a brother and he was 2 years younger than me, and he had cerebral palsy, and it was very difficult for us to bring Adam with us at that time. We had to you know, create a situation as well where my parents could be settled and legal in London, in the UK. And so my parents were working towards that. And unfortunately, my brother was left behind in a hospital for disabled children in Sarajevo, in Vojnica. And this will come later when I'm talking about my work, this will come into it. But the war broke out. All of my family became trapped in the war. And at that point, we were in London watching the news every single day. The TV was on constantly. And that's how we were following the war. And we didn't know for a long time if our family were alive or not alive. We had no access. We had no way of communication. And at some point, communication did happen between my auntie and my mum. And eventually we would get a call, and it would be incredible to get that call, because then we would know, okay, they're still alive, they're still okay. Sometime after that, we did get the one call that changed everything. And that was a call to say that my brother had died. And I was 11 at the time, my brother was 8. And they'd sort of, in Sarajevo, they had on the radio, that's often how you'd find out if someone was alive or not. And they listed the names of people who died and children who had died in the hospital, and my brother's name was listed. So that's how we found out that Adam had died in the hospital. We had to then fly. It was sort of an emergency situation. We had to fly back to former Yugoslavia, get his body back to a safe place where we could bury him, and that happened luckily through connections. So we were lucky in that sense. Unfortunately, many people weren't lucky enough to be able to have their, you know, to be able to bury their loved ones. We flew, but we had to fly straight back, and this was whilst the war was still happening. And so this event was really, obviously, critical. I think for me, took a very long time to understand just how critical this event was in so many ways. And when I was quite a bit older, in my early 20s, I entered into a very long period of psychoanalysis, which was a 5 days a week psychoanalysis. So I did that for 8 years. Interestingly, the same amount of years that I lived in former Yugoslavia. And this process was extremely awakening, but it was a life-saving thing too, because I became very stuck emotionally in every single way. I became very blocked. I think the trauma of everything that had happened, caused me to be quite frozen and created difficulties for me to create artwork, to do anything really creative. It was a sort of survival mode, and psychoanalysis really, saved my life in that sense, but also enriched my life and enriched my artwork. And I think, at this point I can begin to show a presentation of my work, unless there's a question before I continue. So I'll just do some screen sharing. Okay. Sorry, I'm in the wrong image. I'm starting with work that I did whilst I was studying at the Royal College of Art. And this work obviously sums up my work in a lot of ways, because it's about displacement, it's about place. I often use objects that are sort of domestic, personal, intimate objects, and mix them up with references to the external world. So I have a set of drawers, and inside I painted from Google Earth some images looking down. And then there's references to sort of borders, boundaries, and games too, and the way that space is dealt with in games. As cast heart shapes. The work in a way is quite illustrative, and that's how I made work at the time. In a sense, pointing to a specific direction of an event or anything like that, but it's talking about displacement and navigating space. And I was thinking about this idea of how you don't necessarily have a lot of control in life of where you end up, where you're born, where you end up, what may happen to you. There's that sense that anything could happen, and it kind of feels like a dangerous game in a way, but you could also be lucky or unlucky. And the next piece I made was this work here, which I often work with objects that show some sense of transience. So something that can be set up, put together, and at the same time dismantled quite quickly, removed and put up somewhere else. So almost these kind of existential places that you sort of set up in your mind, but of course I'm doing it through sculpture, and I'm playing with sculpture as a medium. And I often use images in my work. So I paint paintings onto objects. And so they become these kind of reflections or projections really of places that could be in your mind, that could be a part of a memory. Often they're peripheral kind of views in between, not quite belonging here or there, sort of just floating. Things just kind of floating, not quite being here or there, and a sense of the gravity being pulled away, things being, elevated. And this piece was quite pivotal. This piece, I really began to dig a bit deeper, I think, and this coincided with my psychoanalysis that I was having at the time. Obviously, I spent 5 days a week on a mattress lying down, talking about, you know, sort of the unconscious being kind of in charge probably, but the mattress became a really big thing in my life, I guess, in that sense, and that process of psychoanalysis, that my psychoanalyst sitting behind me in the way that this building is sitting behind the mattress. So this image came to me when I found a cot mattress on the street. It was a really, really powerful moment, seeing a child's mattress thrown out into the street. It was just kind of quite a raw thing to see this place of intimacy that should be protected. The most vulnerable kind of state is being that kind of vulnerable child, and that suddenly being exposed and then being set against this tower block, condensed, miniaturized. And so there's this tension between things that are being very condensed, squeezed with space, right? You know, there's not a lot of space in these tower blocks. You don't have that much breathing room between you and your neighbor. You don't have much control who you're living next to. It's a compromised way of living, potentially, depending on where it is. And then immediately you're thrown into that space of intimacy, of dream, sleep, sexuality, everything, bam, you know, straight from one to the other. So I like that contrast. And then the mirrors turned it into possibly a thing of self-consciousness. And I think at the time, well, what I've always been concerned about is being in a way quite claustrophobic, not having a lot of psychic space and not having a lot of that space between your private self and the outside world. And this is something that really happens, I think, somebody who's displaced in a kind of unfortunate circumstance where you're thrown suddenly into a new environment, but you're having to then adapt and take on new ways of being, new ways of communicating, new ways of functioning very, very quickly, whilst at the same time having to somehow hold on to your past, to your memories, to what was you, to what, you know, you remember as yourself, to what the images that you were seeing every day, the landscape that you were seeing every day, being thrown from sort of one end to the other really quickly causes a lot of difficulty in being able to function in a kind of healthy way. You know, you're struggling the whole time to function, really, you know, let alone to be able to function and be creative and do all of these other things that are really kind of a luxury for a lot of people would see that as a luxury when they're kind of in survival mode. So this piece, I think I can read a lot into it, and obviously it's not ideal that I'm explaining everything, but perhaps it is interesting to hear some of these things. So in a way it became like a reflection of life, a reflection of from the beginning to the end. There's this kind of circular feeling to this piece, and there's more, but anyway, this is where I started to deal really with that vulnerability, childhood exposure, perhaps an attack on that as well. And this piece followed that, and in a way it's an extension of that, very similar. Again, a market stall with mattresses this time hanging, and they're all cot mattresses again. So there's a kind of contrast between things being quite brutal, hanging like a piece of meat in a way, being exposed to the elements, but at the same time the work ends up being quite restful, and there's a sense of rest and peace to it as well. And I guess I'm battling with these things in my own mind, I think, with struggling with that sense of being in touch with that vulnerable self and the vulnerable child that's within us, and perhaps the trauma that's happened and the attack on that vulnerability in society, in the world, and at the same time creating work that ends up having a sense of harmony and peace to it, which is something that I crave in my own mind. And this piece behind it is an extension of that. It's called In Your Warmth. And I was thinking about the relationship between the child and the mother, but perhaps children who aren't able to have that mother's warmth. So there's a substitute there of the desert and that warmth in that sense. And this piece, again, I'm continuing to work with, this is called Butterfly Bolt, and it's a continuation of working with bedding, with things that are referencing sleep and shelter, but where sleep and shelter seem very difficult, compromised, rigid. So there's this rigidity to this work and something quite brutal about it. All of these bed sheets are pierced with a threaded rod. And then there's also butterfly bolts, you know, like wing nuts, we call them, which reference the potential of freedom, escape, lightheartedness, like, you know, gravity disappearing. And there's images that I painted directly onto the furniture, which again are sort of like the way things are imprinted onto us. I don't have people ever referenced in a direct, I don't have figures in my work, but people are always present in the work, or perhaps the absence of them is what's present in the work. And the images are of explosions, whether they be by a petrol station or a war. It's still sort of this kind of catastrophe on the landscape. And there's a cot mattress here attached to the back. So they always keep appearing in my work. And the work is often very spatial. It's about walking around, moving your head from down to up, left to right. And it's about being in the space and, you know, psychologically and physically. And this piece is again, that desire I have of wanting that sense of freedom, that sense of air and sense of something being light. Again, referencing transience, things being in between. But here, the beach balls come in, which is a bit unexpected, I guess, when you can when you look at my previous work, which is a little bit more, potentially a bit more bleak and subdued colours. And in the last piece, there was a desire to just inject really sharp, bright colours. And perhaps at this point, something else awakened inside me. And there was that desire to talk about things in a slightly different way. It's not completely clear at this point in the work, just as it's not in my head, but it becomes clearer later, and you'll see how. Again, I'm talking, you know, there's this thing about gravity, there's this thing about weightlessness. And perhaps as someone who is in diaspora, who is displaced, there's those two opposing things of kind of feeling that you don't really belong, you're not really rooted somewhere, you're kind of floating. And it can be a great feeling potentially, but it can also equally be very anxious, anxiety-ridden feeling. And in my work, I'm often maybe a place where that can be okay. And of course, comments on childhood, on holiday, on that light-hearted memory that you might have of the beach ball being hit and then sort of really quickly falling down pathetically. And the next piece is a lot more punchy, I guess. It's called Closeness. There was the biggest project I did at that point. And it's in a bank vault room, which is really important in terms of the concept of the work. So this was an old, but used to be a bank. The walls have steel inside. So it's a space that's extremely protected and safe when locked, but equally, as well as being protected, it's extremely confining and imprisoning too. And so these two opposing states are what I think are important about this work. There's that sense of being cozy and, you know, lots of protection around you, everyone together, but at the same time, it's claustrophobic. Things are too close together and there isn't that space. Again, the space thing keeps coming back. But this was a big project. I collected
Anna, I think you just froze. I don't know if you can hear me, but I don't think we can hear you. We just lost you for a few seconds.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so I was saying that this was a big project I did where I collected 80 cot mattresses from 80 different homes. This was people selling their cot mattresses that they no longer needed, their child had outgrown them. And so it was a big project, and physically I had to do this for months on public transport and get these mattresses together. But also emotionally it was cathartic process. This is the first work which really maybe directly deals with a specific event in the Yugoslav war, and an event that obviously is very changed things for me. But my brother, the hospital that he was in, called Former in Sarajevo, when my brother died, about 2 months later, on the news we saw that the hospital had been abandoned by all the staff due to the impending sort of attack that was coming, apparently. And all the children were left alone in the hospital for 3 days. And this happened 2 months after my brother died. So it was a shock at the time, but I remember us watching the news and thinking if Adam was alive, we would be, or however long, we didn't know at the time, but that's how long they were left alone for. And so I was just imagining that hospital and imagining this place of these children without fathers or mothers together in this space, in this very confined claustrophobic space. There is sound to this work, so I'll just play that for you. So that was the sound that you heard in the installation. And I wanted to create a sound where you felt that you were kind of trapped inside somewhere, either imagining what the sound would be like from inside a womb. You could hear some noise, some music outside. You weren't a part of it, it was outside. You were expelled from that environment. And at the same time, there are these different sorts of sounds, disjointed, fragmented sounds. So I wanted to create a sense of that fragmentation and a sense of being somewhere, like a bed sheet flapping, or imagining, where is this? Where are you? Are you trapped? Are you protected? And these markings on the pillows are following the direct, stains of fluid, which is in a way like the idea about carving out a bit of space for yourself, carving out whatever space there is. So it's all about that. It's all about space and having that kind of, you can be either alone or in a kind of comfortable way, or you can be alone in a very claustrophobic way. So obviously, if you're a child and you're left alone without adults, that's an extremely unhealthy place to be. But if you're alone in a different way, then it can be okay. I don't know. It's just basically looking at different ways of what's healthy space, what's unhealthy space, what's healthy boundary, unhealthy boundary. But of course, it's a lot about the trauma of children being left alone in these situations, and you know, and not having that connection to the world, not being able to see, to touch, to feel something safe around them. The next piece is called Drop Down, Back Up. Again, this is playing with gravity. In a way, it's the first wall piece I've done, but it's setting up a space again. It's setting up a temporary space. These are tarpaulins that could be opened up, and you could create perhaps shelter out of them, but they're actually hanging off disability bars. And so there's the idea of the kind of the weight of the body, of moving the body around. And I was thinking about, as a refugee or a migrant or someone who's displaced, depending on where you're from, but and I think actually I was specifically thinking about people who are stuck in refugee camps, who don't know when they'll be able to get out. What does the future look like? How can their future look? How do you live in that space of not knowing, of being stuck in that kind of mind frame of not being able to imagine the future, but also being completely extracted from your past and not having that identity solidly. So it's a really difficult place and spot to be. With these works, the tarpaulins, in a way, they're very heavy, like not as heavy as a body, but certainly they have that weight to them. They're covered in wax, and then there's oil paintings on top of them, and there are different kind of topographical viewpoints as well as spatial. And there's repeated segments. So from this painting, I repeated a segment from this painting and put it somewhere else. So it's talking about fragmentation, the repetition of memory, the fragmentation of memory of place. This is a refugee camp. And then another section of that camp painted elsewhere. And so as you walk through the work, you're viewing different paintings from different sides. This is now entering into a totally different zone. So I went to Utica on a research trip, residency, where there's a really large Bosnian diaspora. So in Utica, which isn't that big a place, but there's sort of quite a large percentage of Bosnians who settled there during the war and after the war. And they created their own world there. So it was quite fascinating. This is inside the mosque that I visited. And it's a community room. And I just love the kind of combination of having this map painted with these sofas, which really look like you're in Bosnia. So people's kind of desire to be back where they were, and people's recreation of a place and a space. And many of them were really living in this very solid Bosnian community, where it was as if you were in Bosnia when you're walking around in shops, you know, seeing the houses from the outside. This is all in the community room. And this is the Bosnian room. So they have a room that's just completely replicating that. And this is a shop with this really legendary guy who I met, complete character, a very popular guy in the area. And they really made a name for themselves. They opened up shops, and like a lot of Bosnians there did, they really survived. They survived well. I just like the madness of the shop, everything, and then everything just condensed into the space from everywhere. And this sense of, again, displacement of just these random things just put together in this crazy, chaotic way. And that's him showing off his phone with the Yugoslav flag. So people obviously have very different kind of feelings after the war, where they stand with politics, where they stood with politics before the war. He's obviously, you know, has that sort of nostalgia about Yugoslavia, how it was pre-war of the 90s. Again, I'm just showing these with the sort of absurdity of things together, thrown together. and this is a cafe that's there. So being there was like being in Sarajevo. It was the same, honestly. He cooked kebab for me and we ate there together. And then there's some images of houses that it was just amazing to be driven around and seeing houses that were occupied by Bosnians, how they made their garden, very proud of their garden. You know, there's that real passion about returning to home and having that sense of pride and re-establishing yourself, completely re-establishing yourself, and having that kind of something to show the world, to the outside. As a refugee, you're demoralized. It's a humiliating experience. It can be degrading. It can be all those difficult, very painful feelings of being crushed and being seen as lesser, being judged, being discriminated against, all of these things. And then people have this huge, you know, fire inside them where they're wanting to prove the world wrong. They want to prove that they can get all of that back. And their house is something that you present to the world, you present to the outside world, something that others can see. So I was really touched by these houses and how beautifully decorated they were, because they were different to houses that were not, I'm not saying they were better, but I'm just saying there was this kind of, feature that you really noticed that was very Bosnian. You know, and seeing things like this suddenly, these sort of very Bosnian, again, features of how houses are made. And I also did some workshops there with refugees who came from different parts of the world, because there's a large refugee community in Utica. So they have a refugee center there that's very famous, and they have done amazing things. And so I did a workshop with Raquel, and we did a workshop with about eight women, and they made different things, but it was about basically creating a building or a monument that they wanted to see existing in Utica. And this particular participant made a replica of her refugee camp that she grew up in and lived in. And it was really beautifully done. So there was that desire to recreate a home that she missed terribly. She missed this home that she lived in, despite the fact that it was a refugee camp and they lived in this kind of a transient sort of space. This was a utopian garden. Some of them created places of the past, of memory. Some of them created places that a utopia, somewhere that they imagined would be perfect, untouched by tragedy. So they reacted in different ways. And at the same time that I was doing these workshops, I created work in the studio. And all these things happened simultaneously. I'm not sure how they affected each other in a really direct way. And that's something that I only noticed maybe afterwards. But this is where I again introduce a lot of color into my work. And it's not something you necessarily expect if you're talking about ideas of war and these kind of quite depressing themes. But that's exactly why I wanted to bring color into them. There's still that kind of melancholy and sadness in the work, obviously, but I wanted to have that contrast between those two things. And I created a sort of network of their child swimming suits in these glass globes, and they're on top of these shower poles. So I used just different objects that I found and put them together in a way, and I see them kind of like networks of lives, networks of children's lives, perhaps children's lives who might be unseen, quite underground. Children's voices are the ones that get heard the least, and that it became an increasing desire to talk about that, I think, in my work. And it was at this time also that the awful things were happening with children being separated from parents at the Mexican-US border. So it was really at that time that I made this work, and I was thinking about all the children who were being separated from their parents in this forced way, and how that's going to have massive repercussions later for the country, for America, and how things like that are done to children. They're just done to them, but the repercussions are actually huge. And this is really the start of things evolving in a kind of unhealthy, problematic way. And to just do that to children is, it's that violence, I guess, that I'm looking at, that keeps happening in our world. I was thinking about the idea of being underwater this time. And this then leads on to the project, and this is my solo show at Pi Artworks. That's a result from my trip in Utica. So all the work is really coming from that time, and some of the work is the same and some of the work is new. It's called Borders Unfold, this exhibition. You walk through these curtains. So again, I was imagining the whole thing is playing around the idea of water, about being perhaps underground. There's obviously connotations to children lost at sea, trying to, escape, flee war. But then there's also connotations to holiday, to beach holidays, to happy times, to happy memories. There's different nuances going on. And with this work, it's very much playing again with where your eye is, how you're looking through little holes and seeing another world through there. There's these different screens. So these first screens that I've just shown you are called dream screens, and you walk through them. And, as you walk through them, you enter into this space. And then this is Murky Waters, the extension of the work I made in Utica, again in glass globes, swimming suits trapped inside them. While I show you this, I'll play you the sound, because this piece also had sound. So as you saw, the child's swimming suits are encapsulated in lots of different things in resin. And then there's also these doilies, which are obviously very familiar, feature of Bosnian homes, and obviously elsewhere too. But there's a sort of mix of generation in the works, from, grandmother to child. I also am playing with sculpture, obviously, in formal elements, and seeing how different materials work together. This is cot mattresses completely stripped bare. So now I've taken the covers off too, and then you see these kind of markings of how the sunlight has changed the pigment of the foam. But I really like this complete kind of stripping off and seeing what's underneath. Completely kind of bare quality. This is called hot mellow marsh. There's ideas of kind of marshmallows. There's also ideas about this being like a landscape. I see them almost as things that have fallen from traveling and settling, and then these kind of condensed streams inside these glass globes that represent possibly fragile heads of children. The piece before this is called Mother's Dress. And this is a really big tarpaulin and very heavy, and it has lots of these plaster pieces screwed onto it, and it creates this all of these punctured holes that remind me of holes that you see in buildings that have been damaged by war, by shelling. But at the same time, I was thinking about a mother, the protection of a mother, perhaps being ambiguous protection. Is it protecting, or is it or is it not protecting? So it's called Mother's Dress because I was also thinking about lace on a dress, and as a child how you might hide underneath your mother's dress and look through it in a kind of shy, coy way, wrap yourself around it and look at the outside world, and having that kind of contact with a mother. But again, it's ambivalent. It's not a straightforward thing, and obviously it's certainly not, if you didn't know the title, it's not something you would necessarily pick up from the work whatsoever. And then the last piece is this piece at the very back of the wall, and this is called Waking Screen. Could be waking up to a nightmare potentially, or to a memory, but it's two images amalgamated together. The top part is, and the bottom part are sort of separate images put together. And that really leads you to the end of the show. So you're kind of you're experiencing the sculptures in a very physical way, and you're walking around it, through it, looking through things, under things and over things. And then the images kind of bring you back to another kind of place, which is a place in your mind. So my work often plays with those two elements of the physical aspect, the sculptural aspect, and then the images, all of them working in a psychological way, obviously. But that does bring me to the end of this presentation.
Thank you so much, Anna, for this wonderful presentation. We had a brainstorming with Anna last week, so I saw some of the works before, but it's really it's great to see them again tonight. They're really striking. So I do have a couple of questions for you. Please, anybody, just feel free to, if you have any question for Anna, to type your question in the chat box, or to just turn on your mic and the camera if you like to talk to Anna. Yeah, I have different things in mind, but I was thinking how when you went to Utica last year for the artist in residency program, and you were working with this community of Bosnian refugees. And at one point in your presentation, you said that you felt like you were in Sarajevo. And I guess, you know, that must have been like a really nice feeling, I suppose. So then that led me to think about you in London. And one of my questions would be, I mean, is there any Bosnian community in London? Do you have any contact with them? And also, my other question would be the reaction of the audience to your first solo show in London, because there are references to war and displacement in your work, but they are very subtle. They are not like that obvious at the very beginning. So somebody who just entered the exhibition space, and somebody that doesn't know about, you know, where you come from, your biography, what happened to you and to your family, I'm curious to know how they would react.
Okay, so the first part of the question, the Bosnian community, I really am not so in touch with. And in fact, growing up, my family never really had this kind of solid Bosnian group around us. We were always mixing more with people from here, or perhaps from anywhere, really. It wasn't intentional or anything, but for some reason we never really had that kind of solid relationships with other Bosnians where I know some people did, and it strengthened their language. You know, my Bosnian is a little bit rusty because of this, I think. And that's something that I miss terribly growing up. It did affect me, and I think it still does, that feeling that I don't quite have that strong community that perhaps would make me feel a bit more integrated with my childhood and who I am today. But that's just how it went. And there are areas in London which have stronger communities than others. There actually, a lot of them are in West London. There's a large community there, but and London is so large, it's such a big city. So unless you end up living in an area where there's lots of Bosnians around and you can maybe go to whichever church your religion is, you may not end up having that kind of strong community. But I've started to only build that up, really, it's quite recently, where I've started making connections with other Bosnians. And it's through my work, really, rather than anything else. And that feels really good. But that's something that I did miss growing up. But that's just how it was. I mean, I don't think it's, perhaps that also drives me to make work that I do, and that perpetual kind of, you know, loss that I've had and that I've experienced. And I'm not sure that having, now looking back, I don't know what difference it would have made to have that strong community here. Utica, for example, is a much smaller place, so I think it's just easier that everyone's sort of living in the same few streets, you know. So it's different in that sense, you know. And in terms of my show, it's true that I make work about these difficult subjects in a subtle way. I don't like to make, well, it's not something that's conscious or too conscious or anything like that, but I tend to make work that, in a way, it is influenced by psychoanalysis, because it can be very subtle, where you can read different meanings in it once you get into it, but it's not like blaringly obvious. And in the work, I was very much introducing color. I was introducing things that you don't associate with colors of war, for example, or, you know, so I was doing something different there. Introduce these pop colors, which, and in the end, the work ended up talking about, I suppose, hope. I think hope became a big thing in Utica from the women that I was talking to there and working with there, the women who come from a refugee background. The hope that was in them. There is this kind of drive that you have as a refugee, because you have to make it. You just have to. There's no choice. You have to basically do your best. You have to fit in. You have to kind of work twice as hard at things. But there's also this pressure on refugees to kind of appear really positive as well, and to have this kind of positive outlook on things. There's just all this pressure. And then there's also the pressure of having to talk about your background and being framed as a refugee, which I'm also conscious of with my work. It's not necessarily just talking about themes around refugees. I mean, the same things that affect a refugee are the same things that affect somebody who's being, you know, who experiences different types of trauma. It's the same thing. Your brain is affected in a certain way. Your identity is fragmented, and you're struggling to cope with day-to-day things. So all of these things interest me. If it's to do with poverty, if it's to do with discrimination, to do with abuse, all of these kind of themes are within my work. And I think childhood is maybe the most obvious one, because that's something you can see those references. But I like to make the work where the viewer can stand in that space for a long time. And that is something that happened in my solo show. People walked in and spent a really long time walking around. And that's one of the reasons I have sound in the work. The sound pulls everything together. It brings all of those fragmented bits of the installation into one. And then you can stand with that work and you can walk around, and the sound enables you to spend time in a space that otherwise might be a bit difficult. So it can repel people also. It can be too much. But with the latest show, I think it held them in rather than did pushed them out because of the colors and because of the sound. And I think, I was also trying to understand from my research in Utica, the work ended up looking very different. You wouldn't know that that was the research I did looking at the work. So that was something that I was thinking about. But I think when it comes to sculpture and installations that I make, I want the work to become something, a transformed world that is an imagination, that is something that's not, oh, this is me now kind of documenting my research. That's not what the work is. It's recreating a space. And I did use things from Utica, and I used the objects that I found there, and the sound all comes from Utica. It was made by Matt, my friend. Well, together we made the sound. So all of these things are in there in a subtle way. I don't know if I've explained that very well, but...
Yes, of course. And you were telling me, I remember when we were talking about the installation Closeness, the one 2016 with the 80 mattresses that you collected. You were telling me about some of the reactions of the people that would enter the room. And if I remember correctly, you also, your mom also,
yeah,
did the installation.
Yeah, that was a very emotional work. When I made the work, I completed the installation, and then I invited my mum to come and see it. And we walked in and we both broke down in tears and sat down and cried for a few minutes. It was like completely and utterly returning to that space where my brother was. It's like I recreated that space somehow, in which me and my mum could grieve. It was a very powerful thing. I'd never experienced anything like that before, but it was like literally recreating that space with the sound. With the mattresses, there was a smell. The mattresses had a smell, not of urine or anything like that, but they had that musky smell of lives. And it's powerful to see cot mattresses because you outgrow them. Everyone outgrows, well, most of us will outgrow a cot mattress. And you can never return to that place again. So you're also crying about your own childhood, and you're also crying about yourself too, and about that childhood that was very violently disrupted. And so and that piece was much harder to stay in than the last show I did, because it was more obvious that it was about something perhaps very difficult and children involved. And I think there was a mixed kind of reaction to that work. Some people couldn't spend long in there at all and they had to get out. But some people stayed, and I witnessed one woman who was leaning her head against the wall, and I think she was crying herself. I can't remember exactly, but I remember witnessing that moment and feeling like I'd witnessed something private, so I walked out. And so there were people also who, for their own reasons, wanted to spend time there.
We have a question from Hella. Hella, first of all, thank you for joining us and thank you for your question. So she says, thank you so much for a great presentation. Do you think psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic thinking can help not just individuals, but groups too, especially through art?
Yes, of course. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Obviously, I'm a big believer in psychoanalysis. I did it for a very long time. It's a process that's very slow, however. It requires time and patience. But psychoanalysis and art are completely intrinsically connected and mixed. And I definitely believe that, you know, even when I was doing those workshops with women in Utica, I could see what therapeutic effect it had for them to make some art relating to their history. So there's no doubt about that. I don't know if that's the exact question that was being asked, but not just individuals, but groups too, especially through art. I mean, if you mean through individual, through group kind of, as a way of healing, yes, of course, absolutely. I mean, for me, the two are very connected. They're both about identity, and they're both about integrating trauma so that it's not keeping you completely locked inside. So it's about, for me, like creating work, when I create something that's inside me and it's there, physical and tangible, there's some kind of release from that. It never ends though, it's a continuous journey, the internal world and dialogue, but I do believe that it can help individually. As a group, I'm not sure how. Psychoanalysis as a process is very much, it's you and the psychoanalyst. So as a group, I do know that it does work, group therapy, but in psychoanalysis specifically, I'd love to know if people do that. I'm not sure. It's obviously a different process if it's in a group.
Anna, going back to the beginning of your artistic career, let's say, I remember you were telling me, and that was very interesting for me to hear, that you actually during the war, watching the news from London, you started to draw. You were drawing those scenes that you would watch at the TV.
Yeah. That's when it started, really, the relationship with art. It was a direct kind of result of that. We were watching the news every day, all day. I came back from school, the TV was on. It was on constantly. It was a nightmare, actually, for me. I didn't enjoy it. And I couldn't understand what was going on. I just knew that my parents were like nervous wrecks, like just not functioning very well at all. And then we had my uncle and his family join us. They escaped the war, and we all suddenly lived together. It was a chaotic time, but I then started to, when my brother died, I then started to really, actually started before that, but I started making little drawings. They weren't actually initially related to the war or anything. I started drawing objects inside my room. And then I got a camera and I cycled to the park and started taking pictures of every section of the park, like literally, you know, this section, this section, this section. And I think that was just a desire to consolidate the space that was around me, to freeze it. And in a way, my work still does that. It's freezing a moment in time and keeping it really still forever, because everything was disintegrating, falling apart in Yugoslavia, everything. And even though I was a child and perhaps I couldn't understand fully what the hell was going on. Of course, I understood it was a war. People were dying. My family were in danger. My brother I was understanding on that level, but, you know, all of these ideas we talk about now, identity, you know, about belonging, about, you know, what that does to you when your country falls apart, how that affects you for the rest of your life. Obviously, these are things that came later, but looking back, that's exactly what I was doing. I was consolidating the space that was around me, because there was obviously trauma about anything that I was building up there, also potentially disappearing. What if it disappeared again? What if again we were somewhere without a home? So that anxiety has never left me. That anxiety is still inside me, that things every day could change. I'm always anxious about anything that I gain in life, that it will be taken away. That anxiety hasn't really gone. And even with long-term psychoanalysis, it doesn't mean that you just are cleared up of everything and that's it now. You're still struggling with these anxieties and perhaps living with anxiety for the rest of your life. But you know how to manage it better, and at least you know why it's there, you know. And yes, going back to the drawing, I then drew lots of drawings after my brother's funeral. And again, this was a way of consolidating something and dealing with something. And then later, I had a great art teacher at school who really encouraged me and saw potential in me. And really, it never left me. That's always been something that I did and that I had to do to make work, for all the reasons I've talked about.
I don't want to take up all the time and space, so if there is anybody who would like to just drop a question, please feel free to do. If not, my question will be if you still take pictures sometimes, do you still work with photography?
Yeah, and I do it more when I'm traveling rather than where I'm living now. So it's more when I travel, and then like I did with Utica, documenting things. And often they can be starting points for a piece of work as well, or a painting. But even the way I make the sculptures, installations, I like to take photographs of them and have that as a kind of image that can be held onto as well. So that frame is always in my work, framing things, containing things.
So we do have actually 2 more comments and questions. I didn't read it to you. So the first one is from Enrico. He's saying, thank you so much for your powerful presentation. And then we have a comment and a question from Velma. Is it okay if I read it to you?
Yeah, sure.
Dear Anna, your work is very impressive, and I thank you for making all of our fears that we have experienced transparent in your work. My impression is often that the suffering of children and people particularly affects me, and I ask myself often whether this has anything to do with our past. Often there was a feeling of powerlessness. Do you have these observations about this particular sensitivity in comparison to other people?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think that's one of the biggest things in my work, I think, is that childhood and vulnerability and the attack on that. The attack comes from in all sorts of ways. So as Velma mentions, it's a sensitivity that's not just necessarily about refugees or people who are displaced, but it's in general an attack on vulnerability in our society. It's an attack on anything that's vulnerable. There's nothing more vulnerable than a child. And then I think for me, what completely shaped my thinking and my motivations is my brother, who was disabled. You know, he had cerebral palsy and he was physically completely disabled and immobile. And these ideas of immobility and mobility come into my work. But fundamentally, that ultimate kind of fragility and ultimate helplessness of being a disabled child, having a child's body. And I think that will never leave me, that notion, because if a family member experiences that, you internalize that, and that family member is a part of you. And if I didn't have a brother who had a disability and who was trapped in a war and died in a war, I would still have these sensitivities because this happened in, you know, to all the other people, that to the rest of my family and to all the people from my country. I think that sensitivity is very much there, and psychoanalysis helped me to come close to that and to be present with that, and to not because we all have that fragility. It's just how it's protected and how often does it need to come out. Can it stay in that safe space where you don't need to access it? Every now and then we all access it though, and we have to access it. Psychoanalysis, because I was having it 5 days a week for 8 years, I was really, really in touch with it, like every day. So I was making work that was really quite, like you've seen, child mattresses and things that are then opposing to that, any kind of attack on that. I'm very concerned with these things. I'm very concerned about children's voices not being heard, about everything that's happening in the world, where the things that make me despair are all the children that go missing, for example. So yeah, I have that extra sensitivity to all of these things, and I think people, if you've experienced a war or we've experienced, will, not everyone, because some people can turn away and go in the other direction and attack it themselves, unfortunately. So unless you've dealt with it in yourself, it may be difficult to show that compassion to others. People can turn either way, and it's unfortunate, but that we're all quite flawed like that.
Anna, we have a question from Nerma. So Nerma is saying, we never managed to meet in person in London, Anna, but great to see you and your work in this way instead. Could you please talk about your current future work? And yeah, thank you, Nerma. This is also a question that I wanted to ask.
Oh, thank you, Nedma, for your question. I am sorry we didn't get to meet. It's been a bit of a crazy time with the lockdown here, but I hope we do get to meet in person soon, and I'm sure we will. Yeah, so I am planning to go to Sarajevo next year, and for the first time go there with the intention to research and make some work either there or from my experience there. So I will be working with Claudia, and I don't know what the project will be at this stage, and often I don't know what I'm going to make until I visit the place and spend time there. In terms of sculptural work, it's often about, with my work, it's often about what I find and how I put things together, and that's not possible to predict easily. So I'm very curious myself what will happen, because at the moment I'm fully open to all possibilities of what I could create there. And it's quite daunting also to think that I'm returning there, and how will that affect my practice and my work? Because obviously I'm always coming from the place of being displaced from my place of origin. And so, you know, even my research in Utica, it's about people who are displaced. How do they recreate a home, recreate, you know, that connection with their past identity? How do they sort of bring that to the new place and at the same time survive well in their new place? So it's very different to now go back to Sarajevo, where, you know, things are obviously really different to how they were when I lived there. Things have changed. But it will be interesting, emotional for sure. Whenever I go back to Sarajevo, I have really crazy dreams every time I'm there. And it's always a really, and perhaps after all of these years, I'm finally ready to go back and do something there, but it's probably taken this long to be able to do that. So we'll see what happens and what I make, but yes, I am planning to go back, hopefully by Easter.
And I promised you that when you come to Sarajevo, then we will go and we will see places and people. And I'm really happy because tonight I see some friends, artists from Bosnia following the conversation. Among them is Enes in Mostar. So hi, Enes. Vlad and Marina in Banja Luka, and Leila, who is an architect, and she's working with Kuma. And hopefully, you know, also we're waiting for Velma and Selma Elibor to join us in Sarajevo next year. So I cannot even start to think like how cool this would be and how many great things we could do.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the idea of collaborating, and, you know, just all of these things are exciting. And I think, yeah, starting off with meeting everyone, visiting places, and just gradually integrating, you know, I'm excited about all of that.
You're also saying you're researching about landscape, and so this would be some great topic to explore in Bosnia, I suppose.
Yeah, very powerful landscape in Bosnia. It's totally shaped my own kind of psyche and my own interest in landscape forever since then, really. So I definitely want to do something to do with the landscape that has witnessed so many different things, that's been you know, features of beautiful features that have also turned very dark. Those very same features that we admire at some stage during the war were also features that created horrific. Obviously the landscape didn't do it, the people did it, but it's just interesting to see what that landscape, the trauma that the landscape experienced. And I've always been interested in landscape as a kind of, that loss of landscape. There's a psychoanalyst who writes about the fact that with people, you'll meet the same kind of people again. You know, you've got this crazy auntie who's a certain way, you'll meet that crazy person again. We kind of meet the same people, and wherever you go, people are quite similar in a way, but the landscape is something that you'll never see again, the same landscape that you were displaced from. And so that loss and that trauma of losing that is something that really stays with you, and why people have that desire to constantly compare, oh, this is like how it is in my country, or this looks like how it looks. I do that all the time, and I bore people with that kind of talk. But I think landscape is a really powerful thing. And it's definitely something that would be one of the starting points for my research and exploration in Bosnia.
How often would you come back to Sarajevo? I mean, before this Corona crisis, I mean.
Well, it wasn't that consistent, but certainly every couple of years, I would say. Sometimes it would take longer, and sometimes it would be every year. But initially, I didn't come back to Sarajevo for a very long time after the war, for many years, many years. And the first time I'm going back was extremely emotional and hard. And in fact, even the last time I was there, it was still hard. I came with some friends, and I couldn't really visit anything very much to do with the war, even at that point, because I have bad dreams when I'm there. I'd like to be able to go back and not necessarily have such bad, scary dreams every time. It would be nice to go back and feel a bit more settled. And I think that will help with meeting people and feeling a part of something there, which before this point, I didn't necessarily feel so much. All my family were displaced from Sarajevo, so they're living in different parts of the country, those who are still alive.
So on this note, I'm going to read what Leila wrote. So she says, thank you so much for sharing your work with us today. I was going to ask you, what is your relationship with Sarajevo today, but you have already answered my question. We will be waiting for you in Sarajevo next year. And
great, thank you.
Also, Victoria is saying, thank you, Anna, your work is very inspiring and so emotional. Enes is saying hi to everyone. And Yvonne, thank you, Anna, thank you, Claudia and Kuma, for this talk. And Anna, thank you for your deeply thoughtful and powerful work. Yvonne, if I might say, Yvonne lives in the United States. She's a professor there and an artist as well. Hi, Yvonne, it's good to see you again. So she joined us at Kuma Summer School last year, and she curated an exhibition with Bosnian artists living in the US. I don't remember if it was last year or a couple of years ago.
Oh, thank you very much, and nice to meet you.
2018, yeah. Can I just, sorry, Ivan, if you wanna, I'm just trying to, yeah, it's so open your mic. Yeah, hi.
Hello.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Yeah, I'm so glad I caught the time correctly because I saw your email like 10 minutes before this started. So thank you.
Oh, excellent. Oh, it's nice that someone's watching this from the US.
And I actually went to Syracuse as an undergrad, so those images of Utica and Syracuse I know very well. So.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It was a great talk. Just the layers of meaning and how you distill that into imagery that just is so evocative and meaningful. And like you said, to people who've had similar experiences and maybe enter as well through other types of trauma and experience. So really wonderful, beautiful work.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very nice to hear. Which part of America do you live in?
I live in Kentucky now.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I teach here.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, that's really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yvonne, I also hope that I will see you again in Sarajevo at some point.
Yes, I hope so too. So thank you. It's good to see several people. Hi, Velma, and several other names too. It's been a while, so it's good to see you all. So.
Yeah. Okay, I don't think I have any more question for you, Anna. If there is anything you would like to add, anything I forgot to ask you, or
I think we've covered most of it. Yeah, thank you very much for hosting this and for your questions, and thank you everyone for your questions too and your comments. It's really nice to hear. So it was really amazing opportunity to be able to do this, and I really can't wait to be in Sarajevo soon and meet you all in person.
Thank you for being so generous with your time and sharing your story to us. And yeah, also Lovorica in Denmark, she's saying, thank you, Anna, for this intimate insight and your fantastic work. I'm just so happy there are just so many people from Bosnia, living in Bosnia and living abroad, following the talk, and so many other people who are connected, work with Bosnian artists and are interested in Bosnia. So I really have to say that I basically told this to everyone, but I was really against Kuma going online and having these intimate conversations on Zoom. That was something, it took me like months to finally decided that yes, maybe Kuma could also go online instead of having our beautiful small classroom where we could all sit at around the same table, you know. But I really have to say that it's getting really, really intimate and emotional and super nice, even on Zoom, and even if we just can see each other like through a screen. So I'm actually really happy that we are doing this. Of course, it's not the same like meeting in person, but it's been really, really great. It's been amazing with Velma the other day, with you, Anna, today, and I really look forward also to next week to hear from Selma and Velibor. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone for following tonight. And so next appointment is next week on Tuesday, same time, 6 p.m. Sarajevo with Selma. And then Thursday with Velibor at 6 o'clock Sarajevo time. So I really do hope to see you. Selma is saying, thank you, Anna, for sharing such deep and emotional work. And also thank you, Claudia, you are our Kuma. Well, thank you, Selma. And Velibor also saying, thanks so much, Anna, great talk.
Thank you, everyone.
So, thank you so much. And yeah, we will see you very, very soon in Sarajevo.
Yeah.
You will be welcome.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay. I wish you all a very nice evening or rest of the day, depending what time is it in your home right now. And yeah, see you soon. See you soon next week. Really hope that you will join us again. Velma, thank you, dear Claudia and Anna. Great talk. Anna, see you soon in Sarajevo or somewhere else. Exactly, we could all. I have to always be in Sarajevo, you know. Hopefully, we will all be able to travel soon, anywhere, as it was like before.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay then. Yeah. We should have a Kuma drink session probably when we finish with the talks, so we can still chat a little bit. Yeah, we can do that.
That's a nice idea.
Next week, after Velibor's talk, maybe we can hang out.
Yeah.
Well, I'm also going to leave until the end, so.
Okay, Nerma also saying thank you, everyone. See you next week. Okay then. Anna, thank you so much again. We'll be in touch next days.
Yes, and I'm looking forward to being in the talk on Tuesday. I'll catch it from work again, but I will be there.
Yes. Also, Amila is saying, Anna, thank you so much for the intimate story, and Claudia, congrats on the program. Well, thank you, Amila.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for following us. Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Hi, Selma.
Hi. Sorry, I just wanted to quickly turn it on. Hi, Anna.
Hello.
No, you know what, your presentation was obviously very, very moving and personal and everything. But what kind of, at the end, when you said, you know, you often obviously have these nightmares and stuff when you come to Sarajevo and re-experiencing everything again. But then you said, maybe when I meet people and have sort of this different relationship with the city because of people that you're meeting, maybe they'll change. And that's why my comment, I really don't feel like typing these comments, and I thought, well, maybe I won't turn the camera on, but now I'm like, well, I'll do it at the end when it's more of like just chat. But it really is, I mean, Claudia, when I say you are a Kuma, because Kuma, you know, in Bosnia has such a huge reference to our culture. Like, who is your Kuma is kind of a big deal, you know.
Yeah.
But that's why I don't want that responsibility. I told you, for me,
that's the thing. It's actually the best kind of. You're not an aunt. You're not an grandmother. You don't have any of these responsibilities. Your responsibility is just to kind of just be there. You know what I mean? And just connect and share, basically. And I truly, honestly mean it when I say that there's something special happening in the things that you're kind of building up in these conversations, group and one-on-one, and obviously when you have the summer classes, and not just with us who are in Bosnia, but you know, people that are from other parts, other countries, and there's just this kind of a nice knitted community that's becoming, you know, it's like knitting a scarf. It starts very little and it's kind of like, what am I doing? But then after a while you keep adding colors, you keep adding pattern, it's getting longer, you know what I mean? So I think you're being very modest in your role, which is, yeah, of course, your personality, but it's just a great thing. And you are Kuma, whether you like it or not.
It's just that, you know, Kuma is something so, I mean, okay, I had the idea, we created Kuma because I wasn't alone, but it's like, for me also, Kuma is the third entity. I mean, it's not, I don't see myself like Kuma, but there is me, there is Claudia, and there is Kuma, which, you know, so I feel like it's like this entity above us all, you know, and
True.
You know, so, but it's true, it has always been like some like super special adventure. And since the very beginning, when we launched like the first summer school, and then I was wondering who would apply, you know, who would come to Sarajevo, and then we had these 20 people, amazing, you know, incredible students that joined us, and it felt like they were all meant to somehow, you know, connect to Kuma and come to Sarajevo. And since then it's been like this, you know, since, you know, I always say it's like a little miracle. I mean, maybe it's not so little, maybe it's like a big miracle, I don't know. But even the fact that we, you know, I think I was telling Enrico yesterday or today to Adna probably that, you know, even with you, Selma or Anna, I mean, we kind of just met. We met like twice. In our life. I mean, with Anna, we only had like 3 Skype conversations, you know. I already feel like I know you, or I mean, this great connection, which is something that maybe I don't have with people that I met like 20 years ago in my life, or so. And it's like this with almost all the people that rotated around Kuma. Like we were just, there is this nice, amazing energy, really beautiful, you know. And
I think people probably, it's like it was needed, and it took this all this time, and you did it. Perhaps if you didn't do it, someone else at some point would have started something like this, because there was a real gap in a way for a platform like this to exist. But you obviously are the one who started it all. It's quite an incredible story.
I think it's also like for a lot of us who aren't, because I never really until a few years ago had any connection in world of professional art, or not just art, but professional world in Bosnia. I go every year or a couple of times and visit family. There's always that connection. So it's not that I'm very much in the place, but in terms of doing some other things and talking to people that are in Bosnia about the work, it just never really happened until a few years ago. So having so many of us being kind of disconnected in that term, and then coming together in this sort of platform in one place, it just makes it so much easier in terms of processing and proceeding forward. Like when you know, so many times I thought, well, I don't know, I have these ideas, but like, you know, I'm here now and doesn't have anything to do with Bosnia, or, well, I don't really have that much time to spend in Bosnia to do it there, because you always feel like it's better if it's in place to do these things. But now it kind of really allowed this much more kind of relaxed attitude, like it doesn't matter, because there's this kind of a meeting point, you know, where we can sort of talk about these different things and exchange ideas and stuff. So my daughter should be in bed.
Joining the party.
hello.
Can you say hello?
Hi.
Hi.
we went camp, sort of cookout in the desert, so we're all still like wide awake.
What was that? You had a good time in the desert? Yes.
When I was there, I felt tired, but I don't feel tired anymore.
Amazing.
We're crashing the Kuma talk, sorry.
No, please. No, absolutely.
You can edit this, Claudia, when you put it, before you put it on YouTube.
Maybe I'll cut it the last part, or maybe not, it just, it's nice.
Anyways, it was very nice seeing your work and hearing you talk about it. So I really appreciate it, because obviously it's on such a personal level that you can go and visit, somebody. Well, I guess, Claudia, you asked how people react if they don't know the background. And of course, any artwork you can perceive however you want. You interpret it in your own terms. Sometimes you connect it to yourself, right, unexpectedly. But obviously, when you hear such level of details and background, it all comes together much more intensely than, like, I've seen your work before the talk, in this last week. And of course, you can sort of guess things or speculate what was going on, but nothing like actually hearing, really the in-depth background, and sort of it makes it so much more intense. Yeah. So,
and this is a platform where it's possible to get into all of that in this way, because people are ready to listen to this kind of thing. Obviously, some people may not be in the mood to talk about these themes. But yeah, I like my work to function on those different levels as well. It can function on this intense level, and then it can also function on other levels. Because the main thing is to keep the attention there, to keep the engagement there, I suppose, being able to engage with the work in a way that enables you to engage with that at the level that you want to engage with it, I suppose.
For sure. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we'll see you on Tuesday.
That's right.
Can't wait.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good night.
You too.
Okay.